Hello, everyone. Welcome to Film Fans Podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined by the Hawaiian shirt pirate clad Rob Dunham.
R.
There it is. Very nice. We've got an excellent show for you today. We will review Thor, Love and Thunder. We're going to talk about how Christopher Nolan shoots movies in 3 different budgets. We'll talk about the best Cold War movies and, of course, our watch list. But Rob, let's first get started with a little bit of our box office update. Week number 2, Thor, Love and Thunder as the top in the box office. It did have a significant drop off in week 2. It made $46.4 million after the $144 it put up last weekend. So almost $100 million drop for Thor, Love and Thunder, but still enough to keep the top spot. Minions Rise of Gru in its 3rd week did $26.8 million. Where the Crawdads Sing finished 3rd at $17.3 million in its debut weekend. Top Gun Maverick, man. The movie that doesn't quit, 12.4 in its 8th week in the box office. And Elvis, 8 million, rounds out the top 5. Elvis has cracked the $100 million mark. What'd you make of box office results?
Well, first of all, the fact that Top Gun only made like a quarter less than Thor.
Yeah.
Is insane. It's been out for 2 months.
Crazy. It's crazy.
Still making over $10 million a week.
Yep. It's
amazing. I'm not super surprised at the drop off for Thor. I think that a lot of people who wanted to see it probably saw it the opening week.
Yeah.
It came out.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike some other Marvel movies like No Way Home, etc., I don't think it's one that is necessarily going to have a huge amount of like people being told they should go see it. Like,
yeah.
You know, it's just not the same kind of movie.
Yeah.
As that was.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll get to exactly what Thor, Love and Thunder was and was not in just a minute. Nothing particular stands out for me. I think the only debut entrance was Where the Crawdads Sing. I think that's about makes sense for that type of movie, 17.3. I think it's a pretty good showing for that type of movie, and especially with the box office and everything else that was in there. So I thought it did quite well. One movie of note it's coming out this coming week, and that is, of course, Nope, the latest horror thriller from Jordan Peele, comes out this week, and it has its box office in terms of new movies basically all to itself. There's some minor stuff that's coming out. But basically, it's the residents of a lonely gulch in inland California bear witness to an uncanny and chilling discovery. And it's Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer are the main characters to this movie. Rob, I know with your newfound horror genre interest and friends, I'm guessing you're going to go see this?
I already have tickets for tomorrow night.
There you go.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I'll be going to see it with my best friend and a couple of our friends.
Yeah.
Tomorrow evening, 8:00. I think this movie has potential to be like a $25 to $30 million opening weekend release for a horror movie, which would be really strong.
Yeah.
But I think a couple things make me think that. I think Jordan Peele is a name now.
Yeah.
I think there was an article I read this week about how people are going to see movies because Jordan Peele is involved because of what his success with his first couple movies.
Yeah.
I think that this movie has been marketed really well too. I think they've done a good job of like teasing out what exactly is happening in the movie over the course of the initial teaser trailer and the trailers that followed. So I think there's a lot of interest in seeing exactly what's going to happen in the movie. So I think it reaches a fairly broad audience, and I think it's going to do a pretty significant number for that genre.
Yeah, I think you're right on all those fronts. name recognition for Jordan Peele is definitely up there, especially when it comes to the horror movie. I think this one may actually do, I think you're probably right about box office numbers, but I think it may actually attract some people who have not seen his other movies because they're marketing it almost in the same vein as oh, now I'm blanking on the movie. Quiet Place. Yes, that's the movie I'm thinking about. Almost that type of thriller,
Hmm.
more so than a straight up horror movie.
Yeah.
You get that sense of it, and that does attract a slightly different audience than your strict horror does, which we've seen from him before. So I think that switch in genre a little bit, if that's what the movie actually is, it's being marketed that way, might actually draw a slightly wider audience than you might get for a typical horror movie.
Yeah, I do know that when I bought the tickets 2 days ago,
Mm-hmm.
there were 2 showings in the later evening at the Regal near me, and the 7 o'clock one, there were not any seats outside the front 2 rows, and the 8 o'clock one already had probably 20 seats taken when I got tickets. So
Okay.
I think that it's going to do really well
Yeah.
for a debut. So we'll see just
Yeah.
how well.
Mhm. So that's your box office update. Let's move on to Thor: Love and Thunder. We'd promised a review of it this week. Now that I finally got around to seeing it, so that's what we're gonna do. What we'll do, like we typically do on our reviews, is we'll give an overview with no specific spoilers. Then we'll dive down into the specifics of the movie with a spoiler warning beforehand. All right, Rob, give me your overall thoughts without the spoilers.
I think my first thought would be that it's not Thor Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, is up for debate. But tonally, it is a much different movie
Mm-hmm.
than Ragnarok was. There's certainly, in my opinion, there's quite a bit of good humor in it, but the humor is more of a counterpoint to the serious stuff going on. I think when I think that Ragnarok, it was kind of flipped. I think
Mm-hmm.
the serious things are more of a counterpoint to the humor.
Yeah.
So that's like my one main overarching thought about the movie.
Yeah, I think the movie. You're right that it's definitely not Ragnarok. I think that you're right to focus on tone because I think the tone is what stands out with this movie. There's major shifts in tone throughout the movie, and I don't know if it necessarily knows what it wants to be from a tone standpoint. There are lots of attempts at humor. Um, I think some are more successful than others, and I think Christian Bale was excellent.
Yes.
I think that's another major standout is that Christian Bale was excellent. I very much enjoyed seeing the return of Natalie Portman, which is not a spoiler because she was in the trailers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's absolutely a movie worth seeing, but it is not to the, for me it's not to the level that Ragnarok was, and I do think it's slightly to the detriment of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, so that's our overall thoughts in general. So now we'll break down the movie a little bit more specifically. And this is your spoiler warning. We are now going to get into the details of the movie. If you do not want to hear the details of the movie, you can look in the description and you can fast forward to the next segment. All right, Rob, let's do a full breakdown. What let's start out with strengths. Let's just do that. Let's start off with what were the strengths that you viewed from this movie?
So I think that the scenes that had emotional weight were done well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the strength of the movie. But I do agree with you that I think the tonal shifts make it harder for them to, I don't know what the right word is, to maybe be coherent in the context of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
or to be as impactful as they should be.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like it kind of jerks around a little bit.
Mhm.
I was not expecting the movie to start out with Christian Bale holding his dying daughter. That was
Yeah.
a very intense beginning and a not normal Marvel beginning to a movie.
Yeah, we have to stop and talk about that for a second, because I don't know how it was in the theater you saw it in, but like they just rolled right into that. There were like not really Marvel credits. There were not like they
Mhm.
just it just rolled right into it. And so the person I was going to see the movie with is like, is this part of the movie? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's part of the movie, and it
Yeah.
was not like it was so strange, especially with the marketing. The marketing all focused on the humor aspect of it.
Mhm.
So to start a movie that dark, as it were, I mean, it has some really dark themes in it right from the get-go.
Yeah.
That was a very unusual choice.
Yeah. I guess he did that because he wanted to showcase that character to
Mm-hmm.
give us an understanding of who that character is as the story goes on. But I agree, it was a very interesting choice given that it's a Thor movie and it was not Thor that we were
Mm-hmm.
starting out with in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen that in plenty of other movies where they start with another character to kind of bring out what's going to happen in the movie. But it was just such a different shift between what you're expecting and what they deliver right from the bat. It really throws the audience for a loop right from the get-go. That can be effective as a tool, um, but I think it was more just strange at that point. You're like, okay, this might not be the movie I'm expecting.
Yeah. That being said, I think that if you're looking at the story of um, Christian Bale's character Gore throughout the movie, I think it's told pretty well, and I think it's funny that we say that the movie's a little back and forth tonally, maybe not the best movie, when he might be one of the best villains that have been in any Marvel movie.
Yeah.
I think both things can be true, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's someone with real ambition and real purpose behind why he's the bad guy. Yeah. And he has actual like menace, and you're actually afraid of him.
Yeah.
And they have not always pulled that off.
No, and I think this character is, I mean, the one thing from the writing standpoint that they did was they gave him very clear motivations and rationale. Like you had no doubt as to why he was doing what he was doing. So that from a writing standpoint, that came out very clearly. But I think the large majority of why this character was so successful was Christian Bale. I mean, he always puts absolutely every single thing into all of his roles, even when like the movie is not that good. He always stands out in it, and that is never more apparent than in this movie. You're right. The menace, the malice, the nihilism of his character is deeply apparent. This is a man who, similar to another Christian Bale movie, just wants to watch the world burn.
Yeah.
And to be able to portray that as well as he did in the different settings and surroundings was absolutely one of the best parts about this movie. And you're right, this is an infinitely better bad guy than what we've seen in plenty of the other Marvel movies.
I think the direction they're heading is interesting. I know we're going to get to direction at some point, but when it comes to just general introductory thoughts, the idea of adding or expanding into the pantheon of the gods is a very interesting thing with, I think, a lot of potential. But we'll have to see what they do with that. Yeah.
So I want to, as we kind of shifted, is there any other obvious strengths you want to get to?
I still think that the humor for the most part was pretty good, in my opinion. I I did laugh at the goats a few times, but I also thought they were stupid.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the need for screaming space goats every 15 minutes.
Apparently, I didn't read the whole story, but apparently it was based off of or inspired by a Taylor Swift meme.
That's funny.
So yeah, you'll have to look that up if you're
Well,
so,
I know the Taylor Swift meme, so
yeah.
yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. I will say, like, I thought they did take some good emotional turns for this one. I think they gave a little bit more meat to the character of Thor, and I still think Chris Hemsworth is excellent playing that role. But let's get into the humor in it, because I have very mixed thoughts on the humor overall. The two things I'm very mixed on is the scenes with the pantheon of gods and the humor. There were a lot of moments that I thought to myself, okay, this is supposed to be funny. It's kind of funny, but laughing just feels like I'm supposed to laugh a little bit more than I'm genuinely amused by this. That, I don't know how you felt, but there was a lot of like the humor writing was clever, but slightly obvious at times, slightly on the nose. I'm trying to figure out whether or not it was because after Ragnarok, I'm now used to that style of humor in that movie from those characters. And so that's why it didn't quite resonate with me as much, or if it just wasn't as well thought out, well planned. If it just didn't quite execute. I felt a lot like the jokes just didn't quite land. What were your thoughts?
A couple of things I really liked humor wise in the movie. I liked Korg being used as a narrator and his way of telling a story,
editorializing,
quite humorous.
Yes, I did agree. That was good.
And I know this might be one of the things that you are not so sure about, but to me, I found the hammer acting like, or Thor's new weapon acting jealous of the hammer. I thought that was pretty funny, personally.
I liked it. I don't know if I found it funny. I liked it. Yeah, like, it was interesting, the personification of the jealousy between the hammer and the new hammer. So yeah, I thought it was funny. I did say like, overall, I was probably a little more positive on that one than I was on some of the other stuff.
So. I think the funniest part of that whole thing was the one time he picked up his old hammer and he was like, yeah, like, because he was just checking to see if he was still worthy to hold the thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny, because that was like, I thought that was a reference that they didn't explain and didn't need explaining. It was just funny because of what it was.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so for me, it didn't quite work. And I think this would be a good transition. Like, I thought one of the places it didn't work the most was in that pantheon of gods, like the omnipotent city, if I'm getting that right. Especially with the direction they took that later, especially with the Zeus character. That, I think, scene was the biggest mess tonally. They were really trying to do way too much with that and didn't really know exactly what that scene was supposed to be. They tried to use a lot of humor in that, but it was also supposed to be really serious, and you were also supposed to be really cynical at the same time. And so I really thought that scene was probably the most muddled scene of the entire movie, in terms of, like, it really didn't accomplish what I think they were hoping to. And I'm not 100% sure exactly what they were hoping to accomplish with that scene from that standpoint. What did you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. They're just adding this whole new paradigm to things. And when you do that, you've got to create investment in it. And I mean, they've really kind of, and maybe this is what was intended, set these gods or this group of people up as like colossal tools, basically. But I mean, I think that's intentional because it seems based on what happened in the post-credit scenes at the end of the movie that they're gonna go after the heroes. So I guess we don't want to like them. I think they did a good job of making them unlikable.
You're right. They made them unlikable. The problem is they made them seem silly, pedantic, and ineffectual. So like now we're supposed to believe Thor is Zeus is this major potential bad guy, but they basically neutered him in that scene the entire time. So they did not even set him up as really all that powerful. I mean, Thor basically owns him the entire time. He looks silly and incompetent, and it really doesn't speak highly of that being your introduction to the character. If the whole goal is you're supposed to hate this guy, yeah, sure, that works. And I'm not blaming Russell Crowe on this one because I think he was fine. But if your goal is to set him up as an upcoming menace, there was nothing in the scenes in Omnipotent City that led you to believe this guy is really of any threat. It was hard to take him seriously.
Yeah, I wonder in some ways if that's intentional based on where they want to go with the character of Hercules.
Yeah.
But I guess we won't really know that until we see what they do with that.
I also thought we talked about this a little bit with humor, but like this is a deeply cynical scene. Like it really is meant to be deeply cynical. Like these gods who are out there and everyone's supposedly worshiping them, and they're supposed to be out there protecting people, and they just don't give a rip whatsoever. And and Thor is deeply disappointed at his hero and all this. It's a deeply cynical scene, and they just keep trying to lob in the humor of it. And I felt like they could have leaned more into the emotion of that. And it would have been better off to do that in that moment. But that's not the direction they went to it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if with all the other heavy stuff going on, like the bad guy and Jane fighting cancer and these other things, you just didn't want to make that super serious too.
Yeah. So that's where I think like a lot of the humor that didn't quite fit to me might be in that scene, because it just like the juxtaposition just didn't work for me. Any other weaknesses that you identified?
I think that I don't think there was a whole lot. I think that the kids they used in the movie were pretty effective, which can be a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Heimdall's son, I thought, was compelling.
Yeah.
And him like learning how to communicate and how to be a leader on his own. So I think that it's interesting because I think the main takeaway of what made this movie not absolutely amazing is that tone shifting, because really I think a lot of the parts of the movie are great, but somehow they don't add up to, like we said, they don't add up to a movie like the level of Ragnarok.
Yeah, there's a philosophical element here, which is really, I mean, there's kind of a deep philosophical element to this movie. Now, they didn't really play into that strongly and develop it, but specifically with the Christian Bale character and the idea of I think Nietzsche talked about it when he talked about the death of God, where he basically said, and we won't be able to wipe the blood away from our hands. And the basic thing he was trying to say is that as a result of people no longer believing in God, what you will come to see is a significant amount of horrors. And then of course we saw the 20th century and all the horrors that came with that. And so there's an element of that in there when Christian Bale basically at the beginning of the movie, when he is disaffected by his gods and then goes on he becomes nihilistic and goes on a massive killing spree. So there's a lot of philosophical meat there. But for me, it came crashing down at the very end. Again, I think we saw a similar problem for me that we saw, although not to the ridiculous scale that we saw in Wonder Woman 84, the whole wish fulfillment element of it. If you get one wish and you can wish for whatever you want, how are you not wishing for yourself and your daughter to be safe somewhere? Like, why does your daughter, why is it one or the other? So that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Also, the whole idea that this guy who's been in a gradual descent into the abyss, killing everything in sight and continually getting worse to the point where he's like kidnapping children, and is destined to try and destroy every god, all of a sudden at the very end of the movie just listens to the god he was trying to kill 5 seconds ago. I just didn't buy that as well. It seemed a little bit on the cheap side for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm sure somebody else probably was like, nah, it was fine. I'm totally cool with that. It just didn't quite work for me on that front.
Yeah, I don't think it by any stretch is a terrible movie.
No,
I think it's a good movie, but there's a standard set by the previous Thor movie that I don't think it reached.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where does this leave Marvel at this point? We know some of the movies that were coming up. We got another Black Panther movie coming up here soon. Did we get a major sense of what's coming up with Marvel and what the future of Marvel is going forward for the next year or two?
Well, I think the only thing that we were shown was like the introduction of the gods being a part of things.
Yeah.
And it's yet to be seen how big a role Hercules will have, but obviously that's a name that doesn't matter who you are. When you see that come up in the post-credit scene, that sparks interest because of how much has been done with that character in the past.
Mm-hmm. I paid attention very closely to the wording of what Zeus had to say. And he specifically referenced going after Thor. And I thought that was very interesting because the question I have is this a future Thor storyline or is this a future Marvel storyline, if you know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. Is this going to be something that's going to involve the rest of the characters in Marvel, or is this just something they're going to come back to later with Thor? The wording seemed to suggest maybe it's not as universal, but who knows? That might just be me parsing the language too quickly. But yeah, I don't think we got a major clue. I'm still waiting to get a major sense of the direction they're headed now, which is unusual to be this far into the next phase and really have no idea where it's headed.
I mean, the question that you have to ask too is that throughout the whole first series of movies, the first couple phases, they had an end point in mind fairly early on, so they're able to build all the way to that.
Yeah.
So the question is there an actual end point in mind for the phase that they're in currently?
Yeah, and I hope they know, but they're not really giving you a lot of clues, so it does make you wonder. All right, well, I think we'll put the Thor Love and Thunder review to bed and move on to our next phase. So you came across this video and I really liked it. It's about a 14-minute video, and we'll post the link in the description for this, but it basically is a video that talks about how Christopher Nolan shoots a movie in 3 different budgets. Give us some more details.
So it tracks Christopher Nolan across 3 movies, Following, which was his very first movie, Memento, which was early on in his career, a few movies in, and then Inception, which obviously is like the big one. I think that a lot of people connected to him for the first time, or pointed at and said to their friends, "Look, like this is what we've been talking about." Because I mean, The Prestige did pretty well, but it wasn't Memento. I mean, Memento cost, or not Inception. Inception cost more to make than The Prestige made. So, it's a look at how he shoots things across the 3 different films with the different budgets, what he invests the money from the budget into, whether it's actors or visual effects or recording equipment or all kinds of different things, locations. It's a very interesting, detailed breakdown of what you do when you have a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
And I think it really emphasizes that he is a director who is very capable of adapting to the resources that he has. And I've kind of felt a lot of this that they said in this video was true before I saw this video. I think it's one of the reasons why Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite directors, because I do feel like there's some kind of common thread through everything he's done.
Yeah.
And I think that this little video brought some of that out.
And I think one of the things that Nolan does better than almost anyone else is understand and use his limits to his advantage. Whereas most people would use like a limited budget or constraints in terms of days shooting, and it would be a negative. They would view it as a negative. He views it as a positive, and I gotten the sense of this from reading his book as well, that he likes limitations and he likes that challenge because it causes him to think. They were talking about in The Following, his major limitation was, of course, budget. It's a $6,000 film, I think, if I'm making that correct. And one of the things that they talked about is, well, with this little money, we're not going to be able to do color balance. We're not going to be able to get the colors right. So what does he do? He shoots it in black and white so that he can get effects without having to worry about how he's going to equalize the colors out. And so right then and there, that makes a difference. And he did a lot of things like having lots of scenes where there's a window the characters are next to a window to take advantage of the light and the shadows aspect of it, which was really, really cool. Secondly, with constraints on film and constraints on days, like Memento, that was one of the big things. They had 25 days to do principal photography. And so one of the things that it was saying that teaches you is how to get scenes right, how to rehearse things and get them right, and have a clear vision of what you want out of a scene so that you're not having to keep reshooting over and over and over again, which was a big problem on The Following because he didn't have enough money for film, and a big problem on Memento because he didn't have as much days. But it does really do a good job outlining all the different aspects of what he did differently. It's a really cool breakdown in terms of the budgetary proposals and how budgets line up. But this really does line up with something I was reading in the book on Nolan, where he said one of the things that helped him get to do what he wanted on some of his early films, where he did have more limitations, is because he regularly came in on time and under budget. He says, basically, you don't get the studio's attention until you start going over budget or you start taking longer than you're supposed to. Then they come in and start cracking down on you. But he figured out early enough how to manipulate the system. If I shoot under budget and if I come in on time or quicker, then I pretty much get to do what I want. So there's another example of him using constraints as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And then finally with Inception, you got to see him like, okay, now that he's got the full budget, he's got everything to work with, what he can do. It's fascinating Fascinating video.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that he has always been someone who is character story driven.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why he has succeeded, because he's been able to translate that through every movie that he's done, no matter what the budget was. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I found in particular that was fascinating is how he, in all of his movies, has used that idea of natural light
Yeah.
being the focus, and then augmenting it with artificial light
Mm-hmm.
instead of, you know, blowing everything up with light.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we don't realize, unless you're someone who watches a lot of movies or understands how movies work,
Mm-hmm.
you don't realize the role that lighting plays in things.
Yeah.
And the use of light and shadow is way more apparent in black and white
Yeah.
film. We saw that with the movie Lighthouse. I think when I saw the black and white version of, oh, now I'm forgetting the movie, Bradley Cooper's newest movie, the Nightmare Alley.
Yeah.
When I saw the black and white version of that, like, it just brings something out when something's in black and white, because you see that light and that shadow more than you do with color film. And so I think that he learned that lesson, and I think that's one of the reasons why the shot making in his movie is so impactful, because he's still using those concepts of how to light something to draw your attention to it.
For sure.
And I think it's pretty cool how the director of photography that he has worked on his movies, Wally Pfister, he pretty much just copied what Christopher Nolan did in the first movie he made, where he was shooting it himself.
Yeah.
But he's a completely different person. So it's cool they have such a, you know, close relationship and understanding between each other on how they want the movie to look.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, we'll post the link in the video. I recommend you check it out. It's a really fascinating look behind the scenes of movies and what makes them the way they are, both from a budget standpoint and the director. And it does really make a difference. It shows the difference that both directing and budget makes.
And there are other movies, other videos in the series too. The guys put out one on Taika Waititi and among others. So I'd recommend checking all of them out when you have an opportunity.
Yeah. So now we'll move on to our second one. I'm working on a piece for filmforfans.com right now about the best Cold War movies. And so I thought we'd talk about that for a little bit, and I'll give you some of the movies on my list, and you can check out the rest of them over at filmforfans.com. I'm hoping to have that one out by the time this video debuts on Friday. So be looking to filmforfans.com for the full list. But I've been recently catching up on or re-listening to a 13 episode podcast on the Cold War. And it just, every time I listen to something that had happened, I'm like, oh, I want to watch that movie. Oh, I want to watch the movie about that. And so I thought it would be fun to come up with a list of the best movies about the Cold War. So basically, I try to pick movies that were specifically related to an aspect of the Cold War, rather than ones that just happen to take place with the Cold War as the setting, as it were. To give you an example, like, I didn't put Top Gun on my list. Top Gun is negligibly, I mean, it's obviously takes place during the Cold War era, and there's hints of Cold War in there, but it's not directly about the Cold War. So I didn't choose that one, for example. However, one of the movies I did choose for the list that I will give you is Miracle. And Miracle about the 1980 U.S. hockey team, because the Cold War is really the subtext for that entire movie. The battle between the American college kid hockey team and the dominant Soviet hockey team. There was so much more going on in those moments than simply a hockey team between two rival nations. It was an entire philosophical context, and it really was a microcosm of so many of the attitudes and mindsets of the Cold War. So I did choose Miracle on my list. So that's one of them you'll see on my list. Another one that I chose was 13 Days. Have you seen 13 Days?
I don't believe I have.
Okay, it came out, I think, in the year 2000, and stars Bruce Greenwood as JFK, and it's all about the Cuban Missile Crisis that took place in 1962. And it dives down into what was going on inside the White House and the situation rooms with the Joint Chiefs and everyone involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it shows how close it was, the tensions that were riled up, the internal battle as to what to do about this, whether to just invade Cuba, how do we avoid nuclear war, this cat and mouse game where you're trying to read things and parse language, and the stress and strain that was putting not only the leaders under, but the entire country under. So it's a really excellent film to depict that specific aspect of the Cold War. Another one on my list is another one on my list is Atomic Blonde. Have you seen Atomic Blonde? Now, this is one I went back and forth on, but I did ultimately feel it was enough about the Cold War to matter. Now, some of the ones that I picked on my list were fictional stories that took place under the Cold War. And if it was going to be a fictional one, it had to very much represent an aspect of the Cold War truthfully. And I think this one, the chaos that was surrounding Berlin specifically, Berlin was a flashpoint of most of the Cold War. And this story takes place almost entirely in Berlin, right at the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the intrigue, and you can see the difference between the East and West Berlin, and all of the spy games that played out back and forth across that divide. Because, like I said, Berlin really was the flashpoint of the Cold War. Because if you're not familiar with the situation, briefly, Berlin was well inside. Like Germany was split in half. The Russians occupied the eastern half, and the Allies, United States, Britain, France, occupied the western half of the country. And Berlin was equally split between the Russians on the eastern half and the Americans, British, and French on the western half. The problem was Berlin was 100 miles inside the Russian territory. So it was this little enclave of the West inside the middle of the East. And so that made it a big flashpoint. And so you really capture that with Atomic Blonde. I'll give you one more off the list. I did 10 movies for the list and a couple of honorable mentions. But I'll give you one more. And that's War Games, the classic Matthew Broderick film. War Games.
Didn't bring that one up, I was going to mention that.
Yeah. War Games had to be on the list, and I think what hit home most with War Games is that this is a new type of war, and the new technology is coming in behind it, and the kind of scary nature of having world destructive powers along with some of this new technology. I think that really did a great job of showing that kind of doomsday scenario aspect of it.
So I would also like to, this is probably on your list already, but I think maybe for me, the quintessential Cold War, when I think about a Cold War movie, I think maybe the quintessential Cold War movie is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy from 2011 with Gary Oldman, Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, John Hurt, Benedict Cumberbatch, Ciarán Hinds. So everyone's in this movie.
Yes.
But the reason why I look at it as kind of the definition of a Cold War movie is because it's all based on that spy back and forth. Which I think is a big deal.
Yeah. Yes, and that you will see that somewhere on my list of Cold War movies for sure. You will see that. Um, we can't leave that one off. And another one I'm watching.
Oh, I heard somebody at the door.
It's all good. In doing my research for this, I've actually uncovered several movies that I never saw and wasn't really aware of. So I'm in the process of watching those right now. One of them is from 1989, The Russia House, which has Sean Connery and Michelle Pfeiffer. And so I'm like a half hour into it, and I'm intrigued. It's based on a John le Carre novel, who also wrote the novel that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was based on. So yeah, he's kind of the quintessential Cold War spy author. So that's another one from him. And there's a movie called The Tunnel from 2001, which apparently is about a bunch of people who tried to dig a tunnel from East Germany to East Berlin to West Berlin. But I've never heard of this movie, and it looks intriguing. So I'm going to try and find it somewhere and watch it.
Yeah, I know we recently talked about The Courier.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that recently, and you had recommended that. Bridge of Spies would be another one that is more into the spy aspect of things when it comes to the Cold War. There are a lot of movies that are, and when you talk about tangentially related to the Cold War, several of the Bond movies take place in that setting. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. has aspects of the Cold War in it. There's just a lot.
There are
out there that uses that, like you said, as a background. I mean, and obviously The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. So a lot of these will be on my list, but you'll have to check out filmforfans.com to see the list and how I've ordered them specifically. And you'll also get a breakdown of each of the movies and why I think it represents as a good Cold War version of the movie. So check that out. Visit filmforfans.com. That'll be up, should be up as soon as this video posts, which should be on Friday, and I'll try to put a link in the description for it. Okay. So now let's move on to the watch list, and I will give up my talking about my movies I watch because they were all either Cold War movies or Thor: Love and Thunder. So we've already talked about the movies I watched this week. So Rob, what'd you watch?
I watched, so it was interesting. I was at the library and I just stopped in an aisle and started moving my hand until it landed on a disc box. And that was the movie I picked up and watched. And I watched the movie is called Sarah's Key, and I never heard of it before. It is mostly in French with some in English. So it is a foreign film. But it's about a girl who her family is displaced from their home in France during the beginning stages of World War II. And from France, 70,000 plus Jews were deported to Germany, to the concentration camps, where many of them did not survive. And this follows one of the families who was part of that being rounded up, and the girl trying to protect and save her brother follows her life beyond that. And this all takes place because the protagonist of the movie is moving into that apartment with her fiance and finds out the history of the apartment and how it's related to her fiance's family. And it's a very intense, emotional movie. Apparently, it's also a book that I was not aware of. I don't know if I could read the book because the movie was emotional enough. But yeah, I saw that movie, and what else did I know I watched a couple other things. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. I think I'm too excited about seeing Nope tomorrow night. So
fair enough. All right. Well, that is the show. Thank you for checking out filmforfans.com. Make sure you tell your friends about it and visit the website. We've got lots of content on there. We'll have movie reviews up there, and of course my list of Cold War movies will be up there also. Until next time, enjoy the movies.